Welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast with your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA, who was respectfully told by Aquinas staff to pursue his education in a public setting. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Johnny FIORICA. I'm your host and content creator of the Crime Dawg Podcast. I am a recently retired Rochester, New York police detective, where I served 30 years for the police department. I have two trusted co-hosts with me today. One is David Simpson. David is a retired RPD detective who did some time in undercover. He did some time on the SWAT team. He's a legendary street cop. He also did some time in our RPD homicide unit where he ended his career. David, welcome to the pod.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here. Thanks, Jay.
Jay, thanks for the
Dave,
golf
happy to have
clap. Yeah, I like the golf clap because you got Augusta National behind you. Jay, so you are a 2.5 decade veteran. You served the Rock 2.5 decades. You are currently working the street. You worked in Genesee section, you worked in Lake section, you worked in Clinton section. You are the godfather of the Goodman Third. And you certainly are the lead hostage negotiator for the RPD. Welcome to the pod, Jay.
Thank you, Jonathan. Once again, self-proclaimed lead negotiator, filling your shoes. So
God, that still shocks me.
Anyways, I know, right? So here's the deal, guys. So we had part one of the Mike Curran podcast last week. We got a lot of positive feedback from that. Mike is the resident agent in charge of the ATF Rochester, New York field office. And Mike did an interview with us some time ago. We dropped half of the episode last week. We're going to drop the other half this week. Guys, David, we talked about with Mike last week, we talked about the VCTF, which is the Violent Crime Task Force, which is with the ATF. Obviously, it's out of the ATF office. And we talked about Project Exile. How'd you think that went?
It was great. I got some great feedback on it, and I thought, the content was really solid. Anything we can do to, also promote that unit because they do such great work, I think is a huge positive. But there's a lot of people that didn't know even that a unit existed, even cops. So it was well received, and also it was fun to hear the guys, the unit, really appreciate the feedback that we gave them and that we got about them.
Yeah, kudos to that VCT. That's a place that's near and dear to our heart, as we talked about in that podcast. Jay, what are your thoughts? We dropped that podcast last week. It was an interview that David and I did with Mike Curran some time back, just some content that we had with Mike, and he was fantastic. He was a great interview. What are your thoughts on that pod?
I thought it was great. I thought the feedback was great, like David said. And, I was not there for that interview, but Mike really lays it out, and I like how he told you, how he got to where he was and what their objectives are and what they're trying to accomplish. So, I mean, that guy is, he's putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, he did a nice job. This week's episode, which we're excited to drop, kind of wrapping it all together. Part 2 this week, we're going to talk about ghost guns, which, don't worry, we're going to explain all that to you. We're going to talk about ghost guns. We're going to talk about weapons trafficking. David, you and I talked offline this afternoon, the last couple of days. Due to the time that you retired, ghost guns really weren't a thing. Obviously, weapons trafficking was. You targeted a lot of dudes from all over the country with that. But ghost guns was not the thing when you retired, right?
Yeah, that was something that was very educational for me. Like the ghost gun aspect, I went into that part of the interview totally blind. And I thought he did a great job in covering it and educating myself, and I'm sure I'll educate our listeners on it. And as far as the gun trafficking side of things, it sounds like, talking to Mike, that the old iron pipeline is still thriving, unfortunately. The same locales that were distributing and bringing guns into the area 10, 20, 30 years ago are the same places that are continuing to do it. So,
yeah, and it's great too because Jason, in the second half of Mike's interview, David's talking about the iron pipeline. He's talking about states like Kentucky, Ohio, Georgia. A lot of these places are feeding guns up to places like Rochester, New York, because their gun laws are a little different, if you will, down in those states. Setting them up to Rochester, New York. Mike Curran does a great job explaining that iron pipeline and explaining how those laws in those states that I just named have a negative and adverse effect on the Rochester community.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting was, a lot of people might think that New York State gun laws are what the rest of the nation deals with, right? And that's far from what, as you talked about, those states where you can walk in the door and get whatever you want and you walk out the door, right? It's as easy as going to Wegmans grocery shopping. So it's definitely eye-opening. And, I think that people are going to be surprised when they see how these things actually come from down south up here.
Yeah, we are. Well, we're not going to talk without further ado. We're going to drop that episode for you. We want to thank Washington, D.C. and the New York State field offices for allowing us to talk to Mike. A lot of good stuff coming up in that second interview, folks. Stay tuned. I think you're going to like it. Enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. Mike Curran, ATF, resident agent in charge. Mike, let's clarify for our audience. I know we talk fast because it's something that you, David, and I have done for a very long time. So let's just clarify a couple things. We talked about Project Exile for decades. It was okay, let's look at this case. It was caught on a Monday. We'll review it next Wednesday. But we talk about real-time exile, federal adoption cases, meaning if an RPD guy, for example, gets a guy with a gun, you guys review that case that night. You get called no matter what time it is, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 a.m. in the morning. You guys are reviewing those cases. Instead of waiting that week, you guys shortened it up with the assistant of the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the assistance of them. And you and your agents get woken up, say, hey, is this something that you would have taken normally? Why don't you explain some of that?
Okay, so we have a program set up at the Rochester Police and also State Police in the city of Rochester. Any gun arrest that's made during the week, whether afternoon, middle of the night, anytime. Previously, it would be once a week we'd review them all. Now, when these arrests are made, we get a phone call immediately and say, okay, hey, on Clifford Avenue, there was a traffic stop. Guy had a gun in his waistband. He's got a record. He's a convicted felon, so meets federal jurisdiction. Immediately, we get notified about that with those facts. So then we'll call the U.S. Attorney's Office up and give them that information, and they'll accept it right there on the spot. Or sometimes I want a little more information. But we're prepared to at least drop a federal complaint the next morning on the guy to make sure that we get our charges. And if we're going to charge him, make sure we get him into custody as soon as possible.
Right. And so that is the case where normally, unfortunately, if in fact the feds, the ATF, did not adopt that gun case, there is a probability, more than likely, David, a high probability.
Very high.
Of that guy getting out. But the federal relationship that the RPD has with the ATF, they're going to, what they do is they call adopt that case, make that decision in real time that night and say, hey, you know what? Our agents are on it. Our task force officers from the RPD and the Sheriff's Department and the troopers are on it. We're going to write the complaint just to make sure that this guy is not getting out and going back into the community and doing harm to its citizens. I think it's an excellent idea. I think that you guys have done an excellent job in the last year or plus since you've done this.
And my question would be really quick is, when did you adopt this in relationship to the reduction in murders? The murders have come down from 3 years ago. They're still high, but they've steadily starting to come back down. When was this real-time exile enacted? And can someone like myself draw a conclusion that has helped drop that murder rate down because you guys are there to do that and get these guys carrying guns off the street and held, where before, because of bail reform, they would be right back out to do more violent crime?
Well, I can tell you this. It started in August 2022 is when we started this. Since that time, homicides and homicides by firearm have dropped about 30%. And that's numbers don't lie on that.
So year to date, you want to talk about stats. Here's some crazy stats for you. Ready for this? Year to date, 2023, we're talking end of October, 382 firearms, handguns have been seized, 166 long guns. And now, which is going to be even bigger, we're going to talk about this, 66 ghost guns. We're going to talk about what a ghost gun is. But these are just 382. I'm going to spit it back out to you, folks. 382 handguns, 166 long guns.
That's 604. That's 614 guns.
Nice job, David. You are Rain Man. How many toothpicks are on the floor? So now that's just the Rochester Police Department. That's not Todd Baxter's boys and girls at the sheriff's or the rest of the surrounding counties or the rest of the municipalities that surround Rochester. That's just RPD. And that does not include VCTF. Doesn't include your guys.
It does not include our guns either.
That's great.
I just wish the public knew how much work it is to get each and every one of those guns off the street. Rochester police are doing such a great job of getting these. The cases that we're adopting, these are some real bad guys that are doing a lot of damage to the community. And I talked about Nibin before, about the cartridge casings. These names we arrest, the names are over and over again appearing in shootings. And,
Sure.
and these are the people we want to get detained. We don't want these people in the community because they're the trigger pullers. They're shooting people. They're killing people. And this is why we go to work every day, to fight violent crime.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you talk about those stats. I'm just going to spit them out again because I want to nail it home. 382 handguns, 166 long guns, 66 ghost guns. Mike, talk to the audience about what a ghost gun is.
So probably about 7-8 years ago, I was buying some guns undercover, and they were long guns. They were like AR-15 type platform guns, and they were called ghost guns. ATF calls them privately made firearms. And basically, you get a parts kit in the mail, and it's the industry of gun people call it 80% receivers. And they're almost a firearm, but they're not quite. They're just a little short of being a firearm because they're not finished. So somebody with a little bit of knowledge, say you took a high school shop class, can drill these guns out, these parts kits out, and make a firearm out of it, a fully functional firearm. So when I first started to get into these, people were making the AR-15 types. I was buying guns off a kid. It was 19 years old or 18 years old, actually. And he was assembling them in my car. They were all drilled out already, putting the pieces together. And he was telling me things like, yeah, I got these mailed to me and I put these together. I'm like, this is crazy. This guy was doing this because he was just selling them to me. I was portraying myself. I told him I was a biker. I told him I was a felon. I went through all this, and he's selling them to me, not batting an eye. And he's saying stuff to me like, I'm only 18 or 19 years old. No one's going to think that I'm selling this. So that's where I'll just tell the police if they ever come up to me. So we end up arresting him. He got convicted of that. So those were the long guns. Shortly after that, we started getting called Poly 80s. They're Glock knockoffs. And the same concept, you can drill these out and make Glock pistols out of it. And they'll get like legitimate parts. Slides are not regulated, so they put those together. And the Rochester police pistols now, it's about almost 10% of the guns, the pistols they would get are ghost guns. And they're not marked at all. There's no serial number on them, and you can't trace them.
If someone was to purchase a ghost gun on the street versus a Glock illegally on the black market, are ghost guns more expensive to purchase due to not having a serial number than a common gun? Is there more of a commodity on the black market for a ghost gun?
I don't think so. The prices are similar. Okay. I think a Glock on a black market, they're not going to care about some things. They want a better quality gun. Some of the ghost guns aren't made as well, but they'll still kill you. So they're out there. There's a ton of them out there.
Interesting.
And the price of guns that I've seen and you guys have seen have gone up dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years as well.
So what's a semi-automatic handgun on the street go for? Like
$1,500, $1,800.
Wow.
And that never used to be the case.
Never.
Years ago, when I was a street agent, if someone wanted that much money for a gun, you would think you were going to get ripped off, and you would walk away from it because it was so much money. But people are getting that, and if we walk away from that, someone else is going to buy it. We're not going to pay crazy amounts of money, but we'll still pay that amount right there because that's what they're going for.
That is, I mean, when I was back doing it was $500 for
exactly
guns. That's wow. That's $1,500 for a handgun.
Yeah, and that's consistent.
Just to reiterate, ghost guns, people, ghost guns are not good. Ghost guns are not a Beretta. They're not a Glock. They're not a Smith & Wesson. They're not a Sig Sauer. What happens is they buy them from all over the country, parts from all over the country. And because of the local, state, and federal laws, what happens is they can get parts shipped to them. And because certain parts of the firearm that are not technically a firearm because of local, state, or federal law, they just, like Mike said, have to do a couple shop class additions to the gun to make it a firearm, to make it functional, to actually make it usable. And that's why we call them ghost guns, because they don't have a serial number on them.
Maybe we should tell people what a serial number is on a gun.
Yeah. When Glock makes a firearm, they're federally mandated to put a serial number on it. And the serial number makes, so if the gun gets recovered, say it becomes a crime gun, we can trace the firearm through that serial number and the make and model of the firearm to see who the first retail purchase of that was.
So similar to a VIN number maybe on a car.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also a federal crime. Sometimes people would obliterate those serial numbers. That's a federal crime also. So that's something where we get involved with as well. But it's sometimes we can raise the serial numbers, sometimes we can't. A gun has a serial number on, say a Glock. So it gets recovered by law enforcement as a crime gun. They contact ATF's National Tracing Center. They'll say it was a Glock, say model 19, serial number such and such, and they'll contact Glock, and they'll go to the wholesaler, and then the first retail purchase dealer, and then we can find out who purchased it.
Right. So that is a great segue, and I'm going to tell you why. Because David wanted to talk about these guns, not the ghost guns, the guns that infiltrate not only the Rochester community, but the communities all over this nation. Real guns, manufactured handguns by Glock, by Beretta, by Sig Sauer, by Smith & Wesson. Handguns that are illegal, that come into our community.
Yeah. Where are the guns basically coming from? Where are the hot states where you're seeing these guns get trafficked into New York?
So ATF does some intel work, our crime gun intelligence, on where the source states our guns are. And so it's published on our internet site. So coming into this area right here, it's Ohio and Georgia and some other states come back and forth, but those two states are the most consistent ones that we've seen coming in here, as well as New York itself. A great deal of guns that we trace, crime guns, originated in New York, but we focus on ones that are purchased more recently.
And why are they coming from Ohio and Georgia? Like, can you trace it back to a specific reason why it's those states?
So it's a lot easier to buy a gun in Ohio than it is in New York, a lot easier in Georgia, and there's other states as well too. So people will get these schemes together and they'll contact friends or relatives in other states. I'll put it this way. So when I was 15 years old, if I had a friend that moved away to Georgia, say, I might keep in touch with them, I might not. These days, it's so much easier to keep in touch with people with social media. So if someone has a friend that moves to, say, Georgia, and they figure out that maybe they can make some money selling guns illegally from Georgia, from a gun dealer up here in the streets of Rochester, that's what people do sometimes. And sometimes I'll trade them for drugs as currency as well, too.
And so when you purchase, just for people listening, if you purchase a Glock, semi-automatic handgun, a Glock 22 or something like that in Georgia for what retail, what is something going for down there? Like
$500-600.
$500-600, and then you're coming to New York and you're turning around and you're selling it for $1,500.
Yeah, you can sell it legally on the streets and for a lot more money, and also trade it for drugs as well too.
10 guns, you can turn around a $10,000 profit.
Yes, and there's also international trafficking too, which you can make a lot more money. Guns going outside the country too, so we focus on that as well.
Interesting.
So when you have source states like Georgia, like Ohio, Mississippi, Kentucky, I know me and my legendary partner Jay and I would target people from these states, and we have, but these states have different gun laws. So it goes from, for example, the manufacturer is the first person. They create the gun. So let's just say it's Glock or Beretta. They then take that Glock or Beretta and they sell it to a gun dealer. And that gun dealer is what we call an FFL, Federal Firearms Licensed or licensed person, correct, Mike?
Yes.
And then it goes from that FFL when you walk into a gun shop and say, hey, I like that Glock or Beretta. You go into that store, you purchase that gun. You walk out that store in Georgia, in Ohio, in Mississippi, in Kentucky, and there's no paperwork showing after that first purchaser where the hell that gun went to.
Yeah, it's the first retail purchaser. That's what the trace comes back to.
Right. I will say.
So you got to say that again for everyone, because they're not going to. That is.
It's crazy.
Such a huge.
It's crazy.
People miss that.
Yeah. So Beretta makes the gun. They sell it to a federal firearms dealer. It goes to the first
Jim's Guns.
Yeah, it goes to Jim's Guns. So Beretta sells it to Jim's Guns. Jim's Guns sells it to Dave Simpson. Dave Simpson walks out the gun store with it, in Georgia, in Ohio, in Mississippi, in Kentucky. And there's no documentation after David Simpson where that gun went to, which is why a lot of weapons wind up in states with tougher gun laws, like New York.
Yes.
And they're used in crimes to hurt, injure, or kill people in our community. Crazy.
That's the problem right there. Like
it's crazy.
It's a big loophole in the problem.
And guys, there's a lot of guns out there. A lot of guns have been here a very long time. We trace every single crime gun, and some have been on the streets for 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
So, and we have limited resources, but we have to use our crime gun intelligence, like I talked about before.
Yep.
In addition to NIBIN, we use our tracing. And so we look for certain trends. If we see guns are getting recovered and then going to multiple locations, say in the city of Rochester, to one purchaser out of state, that's something we're going to focus on. And we work proactively on that. We can do interdictions coming in. Mm-hmm. We can travel to those states and try to intervene that way too. We do lots of different things. Our priority is public safety.
Right.
We want to make sure that the flow stops if someone's a gun trafficker.
Right.
And we want to make sure that try to make a criminal case, but we're not going to do it at the expense of public safety. We can't sit back like you could do with a drug dealer sometimes and make multiple buys, because we have to keep in mind that as someone keeps as you're working a case with somebody that keeps selling guns to other people, and people are getting put at risk. Yeah. So we have to take quick action.
Yeah.
Well, no one has a gun unless they're intending to cause serious physical injury or kill someone, right? Like you're not buying you can buy coke or you can buy heroin to sell and distribute, and that's a scourge for the community and stuff like that. But if you're purchasing a handgun, you're purchasing that handgun, yes, to defend yourself, but you're also, that's going to be used to cause serious physical injury or harm.
And you're talking about the nefarious individuals, the criminal guys that are looking to buy them illegally. Yeah, you're not talking about our 2A people.
And that was another thing. It's interesting. These guns, unless there's a crime committed where someone's burglarized or these guns are stolen, 2A gun owners are not supplying the inner city criminal who's committing, 3 homicides with a gun. These are coming from these states and straw purchasers and things of that nature. It's not from the 2A people.
And these are people that are committing crimes. Look, ATF's not political. We're focused on violent crime and people that are committing crimes with guns. Obviously, guns are a protected right under the Constitution.
Right.
We respect that. But when people are committing crimes, that's where we come in. We fight violent crime. Right. And that's our focus. We're not political. We're just, that's our mission, is violent crime, whether firearms, explosive, or arsons.
David and I are going to be semi-political for 30 seconds, but this is exactly what we're talking about, right? You talked about it and you touched upon it. Great point. That these 2A people with legal handguns, are not the ones going out there and going, hey, I have 14 guns here. Let me sell 4 of them to Jim Smith in the inner city so he can go conduct crimes. Is that what you're talking about, David?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Exactly. And that's where the conversation gets morphed into total craziness. The narrative that gets pushed relative to guns is that all guns are bad. No. Because here at the end of the day, we have young kids. I said, remember that stat? The average age of our gun victims, our shooting victims, our homicide victims hovers around 25 to 27 years of age. And it's not from your Uncle Phil who owns 10 firearms who decided, you know what? I got to pay my mortgage this week. I'm going to sell off 3 of my guns and give them to some Joe Schmo that I don't know.
He'd sell his car before he sold his guns, first of all.
I mean, that is what is crazy today. It befuddles me that when I got to listen to any BS narrative on whatever national media and listen to people think that they know what the hell is happening in America. And I'm sorry, I can't do chemistry. I can't do calculus, but I did this job for 30 years. I know a little bit about illegal handguns, and by a little bit, I mean a lot of bit. David does. Mike Curran does. You got a guy sitting to my left that his task force is out there hustling and bustling and putting their lives on the line for this community every day. And the ATF is sending agents and task force officers like you and I were out there to do what people have no idea that you're doing, putting their lives on the line every single day to make these communities safe. It's mind-blowing, David, when I hear these people talking about, oh, guns are bad. Guns are bad. Yeah, they're bad when they're in the wrong hands of a guy, not in the hands of a guy that went and legally applied.
Went through the legal process to get those guns, who got the background check, who's been vetted out with different mental health things and stuff before they get it, who if he does have a domestic or anything, like, the guns are taken from him. Like, there's checks and balances in place, especially in New York, for people that have handguns. It's pretty solid, in my opinion. The fact that if you're caught with an illegal handgun and it's not a mandatory minimum sentence, even in New York, don't rely on the federal government to bail us out, but it's not a mandatory minimum in New York to have someone held for and face a mandatory minimum jail sentence for having an illegal handgun is the problem. Enforce the laws that are on the books and issue stiff penalties for people that have illegal handguns, and you will see there will be a deterrent to carry an illegal handgun.
ATF's mission is simple, obviously. As I said before, it's fighting violent crime. If someone's not committing violent crime, it's not our priority. Violent crime is. We're the violent crime police, federal police that do violent crime.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, you guys have been around a long time. You guys have established relationships where you built these task forces all over the country. And it obviously is working because the federal government looks at it and goes, you know what? We're going to finance this over here, finance that over there, because it's working. It's keeping these communities safe. You guys, your people, your agents, your task force officers are doing shit that nobody knows that they're doing to keep the average Joe Blow citizen safe. It is amazing.
I will say this, and I know we're wrapping up, so I want to say this, is that ATF has always been known, and Johnny, what's the greatest compliment you can give a cop? He's a street cop.
Yeah.
There's no better compliment that you can give a cop than that's a real street cop. All right? ATF has always been known among the federal agencies as being the street police of the federal government, and I commend you for running the unit here. It's a legendary unit, and it's an honor to have you here, and all the boys that work in your unit and the girls. My hat's off to them.
And thank you so much for having me here and let me talk about ATF, because I really want to get the word out there.
Yeah.
I go to community meetings sometimes and I ask people, what do you think ATF does? And they can't answer me. So I want to get out there as much as I can and let people know. I want a lot of people to listen to this. I want people to hear what we're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. The Crime Dawg Podcast. Thank you, David Simpson.
Thanks for being here.
With ATF resident agent in charge, Mike Curran. We hope you stick with us for future episodes. Like my brother-in-law, Frankie Grassi, says, if you can't make it, who cares? Ciao.